management means and some strategies for dealing with it. First, we have David Spooner, USFIA's Washington counsel, who's a partner at Barnes & Thornburg, LLP, here in Washington, D.C. We also have on the line two of our associate members, Gary Baracco, Vice President of Industry Development for EC Vision, as well as Sylvia Reyes, Textiles and Apparel Director for USA for Pro Export Colombia, who's one of our sourcing partners for this year. Before I kick it over to our speakers, just a few quick reminders. We will be recording this webinar today, so be on the lookout for an email later this afternoon containing links to download the audio as well as the presentation. We also will take questions at the end of the call, so if at any point during the presentation you have a question, go ahead and send it to us by chat message. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to David Spooner.
Thank you, Samantha. And as everyone will see, there's just a quick slide with my contact info, but then, Samantha, if you could move on to the next slide. I mercifully only have one slide for you guys, but hopefully this is a very cool, impressive, information-filled slide. And we're going to take a tour through global hotspots that could impact the apparel supply chain. And my job here, frankly, is to set things up for both Gary and Sylvia. What I've done on this slide is compare OTEXA's Major Shippers Report, which is the Commerce Department's Office of Textiles and Apparel's list of the countries that are the largest suppliers of apparel to the United States. And in a kind of subjective way, this was my own judgment, superimposed the major shippers of apparel on top of what are sort of the primary flashpoints or hotspots in the world today. And frankly, this slide should terrify you. Frankly, it kind of scared me when I was putting it together, particularly when you realize that, again, this is only hotspots that are major suppliers of apparel. We could have included many more countries here as global hotspots that aren't major suppliers of apparel, much of Africa, for example. Now, I should note that this slide is not by any means exhaustive. For one thing, when I was putting together this slide, there was a stress on sort of geopolitical or military unrest in each country, and perhaps I didn't stress enough the prospects for natural disasters in certain countries that are major suppliers of apparel. I know when we get to Gary that Gary, I think, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Gary will stress that, of course, the supply chain can be disrupted not only by political issues but by natural disasters as well. So, for example, you'll see despite past unrest in Central America, because there aren't any countries that are in a current state of unrest right now, as Honduras was a few years ago. I didn't put in red any of the Central American countries here, but Nicaragua has had major earthquakes in the past, and that could happen at any time. But similarly, you could debate why I included some of the countries on this list. Some of the countries obviously have more unrest than others. Countries like Egypt, of course, is in a state of change right now, and that's putting it mildly. Jordan is okay for the time being, but I highlighted Jordan, supplier number 16, because of its proximity to Syria, and as I'm sure many of you have read, the idea or the chances that the unrest from Syria can spill over into Jordan. But you can debate, should Bangladesh have been included? The labor issues in Bangladesh are well documented. Those could flare up at any time. And although Bangladesh isn't in as much turmoil as a place like Thailand right now or Egypt, the politics in the politics in Bangladesh have gotten much more strife-ridden now than they were just a few years ago, with a very divided government. So I decided to include them. But I won't run through each country here. I'll just stress a few major issues. The first, of course, are the frictions in the South China Sea, which I'm sure most of you have read about. That's largely why I included China and why the Philippines, Vietnam, and Vietnam are included on here as prospective flashpoints. Particularly, of course, there's been friction recently between China and Vietnam, with China building an oil rig not too far offshore of North Vietnam, and Chinese and Vietnamese ships ramming each other. Actually, if you believe the Vietnamese side of the story, it's Chinese ships ramming the Vietnamese, and the resultant riots about 6 weeks ago in Vietnam that affected apparel suppliers, particularly shoe companies. Indonesia, I decided to include on here. It's probably worth noting. Many of you perhaps have not read about it, but Indonesia had a poll, an election just a few days ago, and neither side will. It was a very close election, and neither side will admit that the other won. And forgive me if any of you have stakes in Indonesia and disagree with this, but at least from the news stories I've read, it has the prospects for becoming much worse very quickly. So I decided to include Indonesia. Thailand obviously is not affected by the South China Sea, but I assume most of you have read about the completely dysfunctional government in Thailand over the last several months, and hence I decided to include them. The Middle East, I won't explain why several Middle Eastern countries are highlighted in red here. I'm sure they're included for obvious reasons, but I decided to include Kenya, supplier number 26, because of the recent violence by the Islamic fundamentalist group or terrorist group named Al-Shabaab. And finally, this could be a little controversial for some, I decided to include Haiti. Even though Haiti has been relatively quiet or out of the news recently, Haiti, of course, has often been racked by political unrest or natural disasters such as hurricanes, so I decided to include them, even though I didn't include any other Western Hemisphere suppliers. Indeed, you'll note that there's not very much red in the Western Hemisphere. And maybe I'm sort of setting Sylvia up here to talk about Colombia, but I think happily much of the Western Hemisphere, at least for the time being, is on the mend, if that's a fair way to put it, and has much lower prospects for supply chain disruption, at least again from political unrest as opposed to natural disasters than was the case in the past. But again, I'll just wrap up quickly. Again, when I was doing the slide, I knew of, and I'm sure most of you know of, all the news stories from throughout Africa, the Middle East, and Asia in recent months. But I was surprised when I put it on a slide like this to see sort of the wide swath of red stretching from Japan all the way to Tunisia. And a quick note before I move on to Gary, some of you might wonder, why the heck is Portugal highlighted in red? I decided to include Portugal only because, as many of you know, one of Portugal's biggest banks may go under or has had serious problems this week. I always forget the Portuguese name, but it's like the Bank of the Holy Spirit is the English translation of the bank. And simply because of that, those banking problems in Portugal this week, I decided to highlight Portugal. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gary.
Thank you, David. And what's really interesting is that Myanmar doesn't appear on your graph at all. And I assume that's probably because there's not enough volume coming out of Myanmar at this time?
Very good point, Gary. Yes, Myanmar, of course, is not yet one of the major suppliers of apparel, but I did highlight them in red for probably obvious reasons, both because who knows how the government will transition and of the ethnic issues.
Right. And I don't know if you said it earlier, but still China #1, Vietnam #2, and that's the focus of the call, was when, you know, about a month ago, and you can go ahead and advance or pass it over to me, Samantha. You know, when the Vietnam and China flashpointed a few weeks ago, that's when I thought maybe we should all get on the line and talk about some of the issues. So let's go ahead and move on to my slides then?
You have control, Gary. Go ahead and you can use the arrows to click through. There you go.
Okay, there we go, great. So for the bulk of the, let me just go back. For the bulk of the call, I want to talk about, I'm just going to click and keep clicking, and there we go. The challenges that we're facing in both apparel and the footwear industry, and then what the pressures. I tried to sum up this outline in single words, and it really did work. What are the obstacles, how we could streamline our supply chain processes through technology efficiencies, and what are the alternatives, which is where we're going to pick up with Sylvia. So as we all know, a few weeks ago, issues in the South China Sea and tension was escalating. Chinese ships were ramming into and firing water cannons at Vietnamese vessels. There were riots in Vietnam that caused major damage to factories, injuries, and death. Last week I was at an event, and I think somebody said, yeah, but the dollar signs were only in the millions and not in the billions. Millions certainly can impact our industry just as well. Likewise, Chinese ships were called in to evacuate workers after the Vietnam riots. Vietnam and the Philippines jointly came out and opposed any of what they call the illegal Chinese actions in the South China Sea. And even some Coast Guard ships from both countries were harassing shipping vessels. So I don't think it's anything to be taken lightly, even though Vietnam might have quelled down and died down for the interim. And last week at this other event I was at, they were talking about North and South Korea being more of a hot spot at this point than Vietnam could be. And that's illustrated in David's first slide also. And so when we look at what's really happening between these two countries, between Vietnam and China itself, and we just break down, I pulled some numbers together. So Vietnam represented on the top and China on the bottom. So 9% of our apparel imports and 3.2% of our footwear imports are coming into the United States are coming from Vietnam. And China, of course, being the size that it is and the magnitude of production and capacity that they have, 41% of apparel imports and nearly 10% of our footwear are sourced from these two countries. So having these two countries poised in intensive moments just isn't a good thing for anyone, okay? As you know, even as a U.S. importer. When we look at this geographically, we talk about where Vietnam came from, and from 2009 and what is forecast from AmCham Vietnam. AmCham is the American Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. There's still huge growth. All of the industry analysts are talking about Vietnam being the next big sourcing country because of many reasons. But now with this China chokehold, let's say, there's going to be more issues. But still, 65% of the apparel and footwear production that's done in Vietnam is bound for the United States currently. So what is the impact on the industry? Well, when we look at all of this, our textile raw material shipments from Vietnam to China could be in jeopardy. So here we're talking about the raw material suppliers that may be based in Vietnam, and whether it be textile but any other raw material. The footwear manufacturing delays could lead to delivery in time, delay in their deliveries for the fall or winter season, just from what happened last month. That's if we have no longer repercussions and things are back in progress. The apparel production interruptions are week-long, and they rippled through the supply chain. A lot of reports came out from some of the largest apparel organizations that are sourcing in Vietnam, and they said that they're still feeling the impact from what happened a few weeks ago. Ocean shipping rates are also beginning to rise because of the jeopardy there, And this can cause additional bottlenecks or risks that'll just drag on all of the different economies, which isn't something that we need to face right now. So what's become the new norm in sourcing? And the new norm has been changing almost every 6 months in our industry. Decisions, though, need to be made to position yourself in an environment where you know all of the factors. This includes intelligence from all third-party sources, different agencies, groups, consulting firms, legal firms to give you that counsel. Also, as we increase our globalized sourcing operations, the likelihood of risk or disruption really becomes more prevalent. The third thing is that there's competition going on, not between the countries, but competition over capacity and volume in different regions. And so that competition can certainly affect how you're going to source. And then last, the supply chain and production efficiencies just can't be guaranteed, because we know that China is the giant and the leader in production efficiency. And as we try to shift sourcing to Vietnam or other regions, for example, we can't really guarantee, we don't have that strength and that satisfaction that that's going to be more efficient because of the other factors that are playing in. My slides are just advancing really slow, so I apologize. And what that has done is it created a need for transparency. And I'm going to show you in a technology system how we can provide that visibility. First, by identifying the suppliers, let's say in a specific geographic region. And like David said, this doesn't only have to be based on geopolitical risk. It could be based on other factors. In 2010, we had the floods in Pakistan along the Indus River, and that flooded out almost all of the cotton farming, a huge percentage of cotton farming that affected the retail and the apparel industry. And so at that point, you had a supply chain risk or disruption. The other can be, what if we have an earthquake or some other natural disaster, tsunamis, and earthquakes are really prevalent in this region. What if there's an earthquake specifically where you have numerous factories located? You need to be able to identify and to zone in on that. Additionally, you need to key in on the supplier types. I mentioned earlier about textile and raw material production. If, for instance, it could be in Vietnam, it could be in Pakistan, as it was in 2010. So what are our feeder streams that are tying into our finished good production? And having the ability to track that is a layer of transparency that EC Vision Solutions can provide. Next is our strong reporting capabilities, looking at all of your production milestones. For instance, can I redirect any open purchase orders? Can I take a closer look at production status of any purchase orders that are already in progress? Can I expedite packed orders to get out of the region before some sort of blockade might happen or occur? Or can I manage what's already on the water and redirect that possibly if that's a requirement? And all in all, you need to collaborate with all of the parties that are involved, starting at your tier, your finished good production, your tier 2, tier 3, and on down. So what I'm showing you are some screenshots in EC Vision Solution, and I'm kind of zooming in on a supplier map. So what I've asked my system to do is to zone in and show me suppliers that have an address in Vietnam. And I'm going to continue to drill down further and further, and this is using Google Map type technology. Now I can see a specific region, and I also see some color-coded tabs. And this is the report view that I can produce. Okay. Right now we see that clustered around Ho Chi Minh City and up to the north and down to the south, we have 3 different types of supplier facilities. So if I have a natural disaster or some disruption that's far to the right or to the left, the east or west of these, we may not need to be concerned. but we need to be concerned with anything that's happening right around Ho Chi Minh City and north and south. For instance, the yellow are our finished goods suppliers, the red is a tier 3 supplier, and the blue are a tier 2 supplier. So now we're looking at our supply streams. Maybe we don't need to be as concerned about the tier 3 supplier, but if those tier 2 suppliers are also providing raw materials to a supplier outside of the country, that could affect other purchase orders. We can drill down into this report, and then we can get a full list that actually shows, and I'm going to transition, I can actually show the full address of each of my suppliers, or a full view of all suppliers that are in Vietnam, for, in this case, that we are focused on. And anything that's blue is a hyperlink, so I can drill down and get additional information. But on this report, I have a supplier type, I have an address. I also can look at the capacity for that supplier and a number of workers. So with this, I have more concrete intelligence that I can use to make decisions. The next step is to drill down further and integrate our purchase orders in the system. So here, I've done a quick view that says, show me all open purchase orders where I don't have a production in Vietnam, only for those specific factories that I've already filtered out. And I can look and say, where have we not started any production? So there's no cutting or any production done on any of these purchase orders yet, because the fields just aren't filled in. So now I can possibly look to shift these POs to factories that are either in Vietnam or outside of the region, possibly to Latin America, where we don't have any major concerns, and I can move ahead from there. The next step is to look at purchase orders that actually are in progress. So the cut and make has already started because we do have some milestones that have been filled in by our finished goods suppliers. And we have some anticipated ex-factory dates. At this point is when I really need to be concerned, because here they've already started cutting or they're in production, and I need to worry because are they going to finish it and meet my ex-factory date? This is where you're going to want to collaborate strongly using other tools in our system, discussions, find out what's happening on the ground. Okay. The next step is we're looking further downstream, and we want to see, well, what goods are packed and they're kind of sitting at my finished good facility, but they're ready to ship. Can we quickly get them to the port and get them out the door? So we have all of our milestones, including showing that they've completed their packing and they're going to meet their ex-factory date, but now we want to get them to the port and hope that the port doesn't have any issues with getting this into its container and onto a ship. And then lastly, I can look at purchase orders that are on the water. So I know that these have already made it into a container. I've got the information from my logistics company or my carrier, and I see that these are on the ship, and I have all my vessel and container information. At this point, I want to look and make sure that I'm not going to experience a blockade in the South China Sea. Statistics show us that about $5.3 million of imports pass through to the United States a year just through the South China Sea. So there's a lot coming in and out from that area. And that's why it's such a hotbed. Okay? But this final report tells me, well, you know, if I'm not having any on the water issues, then these are the orders that I can almost bank on. Okay? So this is a huge layer of transparency. And from this, we've got these other collaborative tools in the system. We've now taken all of our information on purchase orders and production, and we put it into a single portal so that all of the parties are involved. We've got our factories tied into this. Raw material suppliers can also tie into this so we could see that there's no holdup on the raw material. We have discussion tools that I mentioned that are built into the system so you can collaborate and talk over through the tool systems on the discussions and ask about these specific POs. We can also link to your global trade management and your transportation systems to pull in that important information. So have these, have containers been out, are they out on the water? And even tracking through, bigger TMS systems to see where they are coming across the ocean. Another tool that we have is the online booking and tracking capabilities. So we're connected to Intra, which is basically a global clearinghouse for on-the-water carriers. And through those tools, you or your factories can look and see what shipping schedules are affected by any of the activities that might be happening from geopolitical risk. And you can go ahead and book online. And finally, all of that reporting. Those were just views that I was showing you, so they're simple and easy to use. But if you want to create more complex reports and share them out with your management teams and maintain progress, that's the tools that you can use in EC Vision systems for visibility and transparency. So moving ahead, Sylvia and I met at a USFIA event last month, not the first time, but we were talking about what's happening in the South China Sea. And we talked about nearshoring as an alternative. So I'm going to pass it over to Sylvia.
Thank you, Gary, and David as well. And thank you for the invitation. I guess Colombia is an alternative, as you were going into detail of the challenges. I think it's challenges and opportunities. And even though the strategic location is one of the main factors that will respond to these challenges, specifically to these geopolitical opportunities or challenges of the textile supply chain, Colombia is one option because it's the neighbor that has the backyard as a whole plant and a one-stop shop in terms of not only a producer in the whole supply chain that is almost vertical, but going into response of the different challenges as the problems that we have in other regions as main suppliers of the United States market. One is connectivity. So Colombia is an export platform to the world and for the world. Being the opening of the Latin market as a growing medium-class economy, as well as having connectivity by air and by boat of three main private ports and more than 700 connectivity frequencies by air as well. Next. In the next slide. We also want to go into response to the different challenges and responses to these factors of being competitive, which is efficiency, technology, and capacity. Those respond also to more than 10 years of security and investor confidence that are giving Colombia, and as leader of the emerging markets in the region, stability that also the trade agreement is giving in terms of programs that are already coming back. We are not in the main volume number of the suppliers for the United States now because we had some years of not having the free trade agreement because it didn't pass to Congress in the United States. But right now that we do, they are coming back and they are going in specific categories that we have competitive advantage in the supply chain, and the efficiencies are responding now, for example, for the need of replenishment, to having flexibility in the supply chain and being able to have the raw materials and trims that give the capacity within the region to respond to that flexibility, which is what we are speaking in this webinar about as well. Next. So Colombia is ranked first among Latin America's countries in terms of sustainable development, and also thanks to its low political risk and instability and high support on business productivity. This is a result, the numbers and indicators are a result of a private and public initiative that has been going on for the last decade, and is also presented as joint efforts to increase infrastructure, increase productivity, increase efficiencies, not only in the supply chain, but all the factors that affect the supply chain, like transportation, distribution, even the requirements of doing business and setting up a plant in Colombia, as for example, an export platform to a third country. Next. Next slide. and giving an update to our audience and also responding to these challenges and opportunities within the region, and Colombia as being one of the options for this nearshoring. Colombia is considered one of the most economically stable countries in Latin America, fourth largest economy in Latin America. Its middle class is almost 50% of the population, with Standard & Poor's, Fitch, and Moody's awarded the investment grade status to Colombia. And it's considered by IMF and World Bank not longer a less developed country, but a medium-sized country that also is investing more than 10% of its royalties in science, technology, and innovation, which in our industry is important because, as Gary was putting there, it's important not only that our industry is top of the best, but we are responding with efficiencies in the whole supply and the services that are provided within the industry. Also, we are considered the best qualified force in Latin America, and this also is important because in the supply chain you need responses and efficiencies in the whole supply. We have 13 current trade agreements that are finishing to be negotiated, and 48 countries that we have free trade agreements with, including the United States, Canada, its third year, the United States second year, European Union was in fourth last year, and we are entering in a very interesting response to capacity, which is the Pacific Alliance, which is the bloc that we are getting into a trade agreement with Mexico, Chile, Peru, and Colombia. This will enable us as well to give a response to the U.S. market with capacities in short supply options, as well as cycle responses to flexibility in the efficiency of the supply chain. Also, as a market, because it's a two-way, we can respond not only because we have major retailers and vendors in different categories, from performance to children's, from lingerie to formal wear, but we also have strong brands and notion of brands that are responding to this necessity of the market in the nearshore option that is Colombia, and is giving another option to our clients, which is preferential access to 15 billion customers that we have trade agreements with. Next. So going to nearshore alternatives and how Colombia is responding to these challenges, because of the importance of the sustaining reform efforts on time, we have changing the economy as well as at the local level and the national level. What it means is we are putting more stability in the institutions and giving to the investor as well as to the exporter, your vendor, the capacity to respond very rapidly to setting up a new location or being able even to handle a new brand within the region. Colombia is also the regional leader in narrowing the gap in the efficient regulatory practice, and this is important because when you want to work with a partner, you need to reduce the costs of doing transactions and being able to do it very fast, not only the shipping but also the transaction costs. Legal institutions are strengthening the business regulation as well as the starting a business and paying taxes and protecting investors is one of the characteristics that also are important in these indicators that you need when you are going to decide where to either invest or to put your production in. Next.
So that brings us to the end. Thank you, Sylvia. And now that I think about it, we might have polled the audience to see how many are actually doing some sourcing in Colombia or other nearshore alternatives. So Samantha, I'll turn it back over to you, I guess, and we'll see if we have any questions that came in.
Sure. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Sylvia and David. It was a great presentation. Now we'll take questions. So if anyone has a question, go ahead and send it to us using the question box on your dashboard, and we can answer those out loud. David, I don't know if you have any final thoughts from the Washington perspective to kick us off.
No, only that, again, Gary, thank you for what was a very good idea. Hopefully we'll see less red on the map next year, but if not, very impressive tool, Gary.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that, you know, a lot of this stems from demand from the marketplace. But the supply feeder streams have always been really important to me, and I know that's what people talk to me a lot about. Having the capability of looking at your Tier 3, Tier 2, and then your Tier 1 suppliers in a single stream is really critical. You know, knowing where the raw materials and the components are coming from to your finished good, because as what happened in 2010, we suddenly had a crisis for cotton, and cotton in its purest form, the cotton boll, and then the mills couldn't do their job, and then the finished good factories couldn't do their job. I just wonder, David, if you have any viewpoint on the statement about Korea, and do you think it's just a political issue in Korea that's going on, or is there economic conditions?
I'm sorry, Gary, I was reading one of the questions while you were asking a question. But
okay.
In terms of the real prospect, Gary,
well, if Korea is the next flashpoint or the next hot spot for issues, is that politically based, or is that, you know, rooted in the economy? I mean, we all know that North and South Korea have been you know, jabbing each other, but how much does that really affect the rest of the industry?
Oh, very good question. Yeah, very good question. Yeah, I highlighted Korea simply because, and again, we all could probably have a few beers and have a good time talking about which country should have been included or excluded, but I included Korea because of North Korea's relatively new, of course, leader, and the idea that he's young and unpredictable, and the prospect for, although I don't mean to conflate the chances, but friends of mine who know more about Korea than I do talk about what a phenomenal disruption it will be when, and they act as if it will happen at some point, North Korea's economy collapses. So that was my rationale. But one of our attendees has asked us to talk about, if we can, the impact of social compliance issues on risk management, pointing to Bangladesh since the Rana Plaza collapse. I think that's a great question. And I think I alluded to it in my comments, but it is a very important point. It's insofar that labor unrest or factory disasters can affect your supply chain, we got to take it into consideration, just as we take into consideration the possibility for earthquakes or folks coming to blows in the South China Sea, and that's indeed primary reason why I included Bangladesh on the map. But Gary, maybe you can speak to that a little bit as well, and whether or not EC Vision's tool would help with that.
Yeah, definitely, and actually, a shameless plug here, August 5th, we're holding a webinar in conjunction with RAP, the Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production Group, and we're going to be focusing on Rana Plaza 1 year later. But I heard from the Alliance and the Accord representative last week, and incredible things have happened in Bangladesh in the last year. I know they quoted some numbers that over 1 million factory workers have been trained on just pure fire safety, because, and I think like 2,200 or 2,500 ambassadors within the factory, because in the purest sense, what they found is education, and our means of education was the issue all of these years. So as a brand, we would enact a social compliance program, and we'd say you need to do fire safety training, and we'd sit 500 workers in one room with one PowerPoint slide written in English, when the literacy rate is maybe a 5th grade education for these factory workers in Bangladesh, and it certainly isn't in English, and they can't even see the PowerPoint slide. So I think huge strides have been executed in the last year to educate even just how do you get out of a building, which is something in America we're taught as young children, but in Bangladesh, where they're stacked 3 or 4 layers high in these buildings, it's kind of different, a different viewpoint. But when we look at total risk management, you need to include so many scores, not just the geopolitical hotspots, propensity for any natural disasters and disruptions, also looking at counterterrorism actions and what's being done, under CDPAT or similar type, programs, but also social compliance. Take all of that together, create a weighted score, and then you can really map and determine what your supply chain is going to look like when you put it all together.
If you like, I'll give you comments on our experience. In terms of social responsibility index, Colombia is the 2nd in Latin America, and even the index is greater than France and Israel. We have taken social compliance as given, and we didn't speak much about that. Right now, all the clients are looking to see where we are, and as you will see in your next webinar with RAP, Colombia has been one of the leaders helping the other countries having all the exporters being RAP. We were one of the first countries doing that, and not only has responded to efficiencies and productivity, but also the conditions that the region has, as you were saying, is not something that goes from one day to the other. It has to include the whole supply chain, with including education, conditions, as well as the whole chain involved in it, the private sector as well as the transportation and distribution chains, for example. CityPad and BASC also, first BASC and then CityPad, was an initiative that Colombia had to do because of the previous needs of the anti-smuggling coalition with the customs with the United States. And it's voluntary, but almost 90% of the exporters, not only in the apparel industry, but agribusiness and manufacturing, has it. And now we are helping even Mexico and Jamaica, and has reduced even the lead time for us in less than 1 day after doing the initiative in each of these plants.
Sylvia, we have another question for you. Can you talk a little bit about the location of the suppliers in Colombia? Are they concentrated in specific areas? Are they shielded, particularly from natural disasters?
No, generally they are in the main cities, not only where the growing customers are and the retailer brands, as I was saying, as other alternative and opportunity, but the vendors are within the major cities. So the Colombia is in the Andes, and Bogota and Medellin is the center. They are in the center of Colombia, where the mills, the raw materials, and all our yarn forward production, as the trade agreement is located. So Bogota has the main synthetic mills. Medellin has the trims and woven and knit mills, and in the surroundings are the majority of the vendors in the main city. So they are not either in the wilderness or where the national disasters would happen.
We have a question for EC Vision. Can you talk a little bit about how exactly this information about political unrest and disasters gets entered into your platform?
Right, so there is obviously a human factor when it comes into that. What we really manage in the solution is housing all of that data about your suppliers. So if you don't have a single portal that is able to capture your supplier location information and to map it like I showed you, and then to create all of those filters, show me what purchase orders are in production or on the water, all of the various milestones and statuses need to be in a single system, and then overlay that onto a geographic map. With that, we can then look, So if we were to look back at that slide of Vietnam, and we could show those 10 suppliers that are located within the Ho Chi Minh City area, and we know that even though Vietnam might have a riot, for instance, using that as an example, it might be in a different region, then I don't need to be concerned about my suppliers because they're all in a different region within Vietnam. So it's kind of that element of overlaying existing data from ERP systems and then into your production planning and PO management system in ET Vision for you then to look at where it is geographically that you need to be focused and concerned.
And I see we have a question about OFAC and screening parties involved in your supply chain. And I will let the speakers talk to that if they have any comments on that. But I do want to note that we do have a webinar next Wednesday about OFAC sanctions and what you should know about that. So if that's an issue that concerns you, I would suggest that you register for next Wednesday's webinar.
Yeah, and I couldn't comment deeply on that either. So I think we should, we'll all dial in next Wednesday.
Although I should probably put in a plug for Barnes & Thornburg with that question. I have a couple partners here in DC who are sort of OFAC experts, so don't hesitate to give us a call.
We have time for a few more questions if there are any outstanding issues or any final thoughts from our speakers.
Only one from me, which is a response on one of the needs of the market that we were speaking with Gary, which is replenishment, which responds to an excellent overview of the opportunities and the challenges with the system and the service that ET Vision is presenting, showing the factors of the whole supply chain all over the world. But also it responds to a need that is being looked in Colombia as an option, which is replenishment, because it includes not only the capacity to respond very rapidly, but also that the distribution centers are in place and that all the information is also there and be able to respond on time.
And Sylvia, I think that the question you probably answer the most about Colombia is security and safety. So do you want to address that at all?
Yes, I didn't put that in another slide, but if you see the data from 10 years ago, which is what everybody has in mind as a stigma in Colombia, the reduction in the security, in the high security index that they had Colombia on has been reduced sustainably in a very significant way. That shows also, for example, that the social, and it's a response that the social standards are being higher. More than 50% of the population is middle class, and less than 30%. Some 30 years ago, it was 60% of the population under poverty. Right now, less than 30% is under poverty, and the sustainable and educational levels are growing as well. So that gives stability to the country, and major investors are coming to the farms and to the security. So I can give you details on data and indexes that show that, but the numbers on investors are showing that security risk has been reduced.
Any other questions?
I don't think we have any more. But of course, I would like to note that you see ET Vision's contact information on the screen, and you'll receive, I believe, David and Sylvia's when you receive this presentation later. So feel free to contact any of our speakers or contact the association if you do have additional questions. And be on the lookout for an email later this afternoon containing the links to download the presentation if you want to review it again. So with that, we will go ahead and conclude today's webinar. Thanks so much to all three of our speakers for a great discussion, and thanks to all of you for joining us. Be sure to visit usfashionindustry.com for more upcoming webinars and events, including our seminar in Dallas on August 21st we'll be heading to JCPenney's headquarters to talk about some of these issues as well as sourcing trends. We'll have Rich DiNucci from Customs joining us. We will have some discussion on conflict minerals, another key compliance issue right now. So you certainly won't want to miss that if you can get to Dallas. So thanks again to our speakers, and hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.